Astronomican. I am what remains of the song of salvation. I am his will rendered in silent light, sent forth to guide a billion vessels home. I am what remains of the emperor now that his body is dead, and his mind is dying. It is a death that may take an eternity, but it will come, and then I will fall silent with his final thought. I stare into eternity and witness the dance of demons. I sing forever into the endless night, adding my melody to the great game. I am Imperious, the avatar of the Astronomicon. The Astronomicon is a psychic navigational beacon located on Terra that is ultimately calibrated and projected by the Emperor of Mankind from within the Golden Throne through a massive apparatus located in the chamber of the Astronomicon. Beneath the fortress, called the Hollow Mountain, in the Himalayan mountain range, it is powered by the life forces of 10,000 specially selected psychers, called the Chosen, up to 1,000 which die every solar day. The Emperor projects this astropathic beam 70,000 light years across the Milky Way galaxy, which human navigators can detect and utilize to triangulate a course for the starships of the Imperium of Man through the otherwise unnavigable chaos of warp space. As the signal generated is psychic in nature, it exists within the immaterial universe of the warp. The beacon can be psychically detected from almost anywhere in warp space, and is vital for faster-than-light travel since the mutant human navigators use it as their only fixed reference point when calculating an accurate course through the warp. Without it, long journeys through the warp would be impossible, and no human starship would ever reach its intended destination. The Imperium could not survive as an interstellar society in the absence of a functioning Astronomicon. Long-range warp travel would be rendered impossible as starships would be restricted to cogitate or calculated warp jumps of no more than 4 to 5 light years at a time. During the age of technology before the Astronomicon existed, its functions were fulfilled by a strange Xenos techno-arcana device known as a Pharos, which was later determined to have been built by the ancient Necrons. These devices projected a stable warp beacon for the navigators to use as a reference point when doing their calculations. It was theorized by savants of the Imperium that there had once existed an entire network of these devices across multiple worlds in the human-dominated part of the galaxy to facilitate warp travel, but over time many were lost or forgotten in the age of strife that followed the first human interstellar civilization. One such device, a Xenos construct known as the Pharos, was later discovered by the Ultramarines Legion on the ancient world of Sotha beneath Mount Pharos. History. At the very start of the Great Crusade, in circa 793 M30, the planets closest to Terra were easily reached by blind jumps through the Immaterium. The Imperium of that time had only recently calmed after the great turbulence of the Age of Strife following the birth of the Chaos god Slanesh. However, it soon became clear that to travel further from Terra, the Imperium's navigators would require a stable astronavigational reference point within the Immaterium to triangulate their current location against if longer warp jumps were to be attempted with any hope of success. Following the successful conclusion of the Unification Wars, the Emperor first ordered the construction of the Astronomicon on Terra, which would enable his forces to expand the Great Crusade to the stars beyond Sol. Huge numbers of tech priests were brought from Mars to oversee the project, and the majority of the Terran population was drafted to construct the towering machine buildings needed to support this labor. At the time, the Astronomicon was the single largest artifice on Terra, and the entire device was merely a focus through which the Emperor could direct his fathomless psychic energies to generate a partly self-sustaining telepathic signal through the Empyrean. Although few were aware of this fact, the psychic navigational beam the Astronomicon generated was able to propagate through the warp, and those attuned to its unique frequencies and modulations, the navigators, were able to use it as a beacon and pole star when plotting journeys through the Immaterium. By this beacon, the warp could be traveled at speeds and with a margin of safety that had been unprecedented, although the risk could, of course, never be fully mitigated. The Astronomicon was an incalculable boon to both the Great Crusade and the fledgling interstellar domain of mankind that it was creating. In a similar way, the Emperor was able to shut down the Astronomicon or interrupt the beam at will. Only a handful of individuals knew that the great signal was actually powered by the Emperor's psychic powers, and they lived in fear that should he be disabled or killed, the galaxy would be plunged into a new age of strife. Such was the Astronomicon's effect that even in that distant age of the Imperium's first founding, some referred to it as the Divine Light or the Emperor's Light, often without fully realizing the literal truth of those words. With his Imperial Webway project only in its planning stages, the Emperor resorted to powering such a reference point himself, using the focus chamber he had built earlier beneath the Imperial Palace to project a beam of unimaginable psychic power and range through the warp. So colossal was the Emperor's psychic might that in the early days of the Great Crusade, in the late 30th millennium, he could power the Astronomicon while he was off-world, leading the Imperial war effort personally at the head of the Principia Imperialis expeditionary fleet. For all his might, however, the Emperor still had limitations, and the task of powering the Astronomicon so that its beacon was perceptible over the whole of the territory of the growing Imperium of Man became more and more taxing, weakening him to the point he was nearly choked to death by a powerful orc warlord on the war world of Goro, only to be saved in the nick of time by his Primarch son Horus. The ever-growing demand of projecting the Astronomicon upon the Emperor was one of the reasons he handed command of the Great Crusade over to the War Master Horus after the victorious Ulunar Crusade against the Orcs, and returned to Terra to complete his Webway project, an initiative intended to make the Astronomicon all but unnecessary. With an Imperial extension into the Aldari Webway, the starships of mankind would be able to cross the galaxy in the blink of an eye without having to deal with the deadly dangers of the warp. Alas, such a dream was not to be, and the Webway project was destroyed by the machinations of chaos during the Horus Heresy. Astra Telepathica. In addition to this invisible beacon amongst the stars, the forging of the Imperium would not have been possible without the creation and continuation of the Astra Telepathica. This special corps of interstellar communicators was created by the Emperor during the final months of the conquest of Terra, as the Emperor had foreseen their absolute future needed. For the most part, the Emperor did not favor the use of psychic talents in others. As a psyker himself, albeit one of the unprecedented power and control, he was well aware of the dangers inherent with human contact with the warp. Furthermore, the Age of Strife on Old Earth had its own witch kings and possessed psychers to attest to those dangers, some of whom the Emperor had personally slain. However, he was able to identify those strong enough in will to maintain control of their abilities and aid their self-control through the ritual of soul binding, and so with some prudence certain psychers were employed in a variety of special roles in the Imperium, and the astropaths of the Astro Telepathica were to be such an exception. Horus Heresy. During the age of technology before the Astronomicon existed, its functions were fulfilled by a techno-arcana device known as a Pharos. One of these Xenos devices, later determined to be of Necron origin, was discovered beneath Mount Pharos on the world of Sotha by the Ultramarines Legion during the opening days of the Horus Heresy. The Pharos was part of an ancient interstellar navigation system, both a warp beacon and route finder, and it also permitted instantaneous communication across unimaginable distances. Unlike Imperial warp drive technology that used the immaterium to bypass real space, the quantum function of the Pharos once allowed for site-to-site teleportation, perhaps through a network of gateways. Its fundamental function lay not in the utilization of psychic energy, but with empathic power. It was believed that other devices like the Pharos still existed as way stations or once did on other worlds throughout the galaxy. Yet Pharos technology did not act as a single beacon visible across the galaxy like the Astronomicon. It was theorized that the Pharos and other stations like it were once used to create a network of navigational pathways between the stars as opposed to a single range-finding point like the Astronomicon. In that sense, the Pharos was more a lantern than a beacon. The Pharos could be tuned and pointed, illuminating a site or location for the benefit of range-finding. Following the Battle of Kelth, Erebus of the traitor sword Bearer's Legion had managed to complete a blasphemous ritual on Kelth's surface, which summoned a ruin storm to the galaxy's eastern fringe, a monstrous warp storm larger and more destructive than anything spacefaring humanity had witnessed since the days of the Age of Strife. It split the void asunder, dividing the galaxy in two and potentially rendering vast tracts of the Imperium impassable for centuries. Utilizing the strange abilities of the Pharaohs, the Ultramarines were able to illuminate Mekraj, lighting it up as a psychic bright spot that was visible throughout real space and the warp. Despite the effects of the ruin storm, the Pharaohs provided a directional beacon for warp navigation in the absence of the Astronomicon. Though Primarch Robo Gilliman was loath to use Xenos technology, Ultramar had to be held together, and to rebuild the 500 worlds, the Loyalists had to restore communication and travel links by piercing and banishing the Age of Darkness initiated by the traitors. Just before the outbreak of the Horus Heresy in the early 31st millennium, the Emperor of Mankind's Imperial Webway project had required more and more of the Emperor's psychic might as he sought to penetrate the corridors of the Eldari's Webway and claim it for mankind, a task that dangerously weakened the Astronomicon's signal across the galaxy. Melkadar the Sigillite suggested a compromise. The beacon would still be guided by the Emperor himself, but a large part of the required energy would be provided instead by the psychic and life energies of 10,000 sacrificial psychers, allowing the Emperor to pour his own psychic might into finishing his great project. The Emperor approved the notion only with the greatest of reluctance, and also made it clear that it would be only a temporary solution, for he had no intention of claiming the lives of thousands of innocent men and women on a regular basis indefinitely. Tragically, the Emperor would never resume his former role as the active ruler of the Imperium because of the mortal wounds he suffered at the hands of Horus during the Horus Heresy's climactic siege of Terra. Although his mind would continue to calibrate the psychic beam's frequency following his physical internment in the Golden Throne, the Emperor was never able to resume powering the beacon solely by himself, and the once temporary measure of having the Astronomicon powered by the regular sacrifice of thousands of psychers became permanent. At the present time, in the 41st millennium, the Astronomicon is a complex piece of machinery powered by 10,000 specially trained psychers, whose life forces are exhausted in a matter of solar months maintaining the beacon. Their ranks must therefore be constantly replenished with fresh recruits drawn from the tithe of psychers brought by the black ships to Terra to be used by the Adeptus Astronomica. Noctis Aeterna. The Noctis Aeterna, also known as the Blackness, or the Days of Blinding, in Low Gothic, was a catastrophic event which consumed the Milky Way galaxy and the Imperium of Man beginning in circa 999.M41. The Blackness began following the fall of Cadia at the climax of the 13th Black Crusade and the eruption of the Great Rift that cut the Imperium in half, and was marked by the loss of access to the Astronomicon for faster-than-light navigation and a disruption in all astro-telepathic communications. Beyond the Great Rift, in the half of the galaxy cut off from Terra by the Great Warp Rift known as the Imperium Nihilus, the Astronomicon was no longer detectable by psychers and navigators, and the Blackness persisted indefinitely. These disruptions endured for variable times across the galaxy, lasting for only 33 solar days on Terra itself, but for solar decades or even standard centuries elsewhere. This period saw more devastating events consume the increasing isolated worlds of the human-settled galaxy than at any time since the Age of Strife. Such was the turmoil during the creation of the Great Rift, and the period following it that there could be no reliable accounts of what transpired. As limited communications returned, historians and chronotechs struggled to understand incoming reports. With the influx of warp energies into such vast regions of real space, time passed strangely, speeding up in some sectors, slowing in others compared to the sidereal time experienced on Terra, at the heart of the Imperium. These effects on the warp from the birth of the Great Rift faded with the passage of time in the Imperium Sanctus, allowing for the re-establishment of interstellar communications with some regions and somewhat more reliable warp travel. This restoration of stability, combined with the onset of the Imperial counteroffensive known as the Indomitus Crusade, eventually restored the grip of the Emperor over the Imperium Sanctus, but the Imperium Nihilus still remained beyond the Emperor's light. However, the price paid proved steep. Slightly less than half of the 1,000 Space Marine chapters known to operate across the galaxy remained unaccounted for, and no less than 12 Space Marine chapter homeworlds were reported as destroyed during the Noctis Aeterna and the equally bitter campaigns that followed. Adeptus Astronomica. It is the duty of the portion of the Adeptus Terra called the Adeptus Astronomica to maintain all aspects of the Astronomicon, including training those sanctioned psychers who will power it. The psychic light of the Astronomicon is beamed from Terra, from the chamber of the Astronomicon buried deep beneath the Himalayan mountains. The Astronomicon is powered by the psychers trained by the Adepta. though it is the omnipotent will of the Emperor himself that constantly directs this psychic energy across the depths of approximately 70,000 light years of galactic space. Although the Emperor does not provide the psychic energy of the beacon, only he has the psychic control required to handle such immense amounts of psychic energy and direct it across the galaxy. The psychers who power the Astronomicon are recruited into the Adeptus Astronomica through the division of the Adeptus Terra called the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. They are initiated into the Adeptus Astronomica as alkalites and are taught how to use their powers, as well as the philosophy of the Adepta and the pivotal role it plays in the continued existence of the Imperium. Astronomica alkalites learn the lore and technical arcana of the Astronomicon. Some achieve a mystic state, gaining the status of chosen, and it is these chosen of the Astronomicon who are eventually called to serve in the chamber of the Astronomicon. Here, they fuel the Astronomicon's beacon with their psychic energies. As their powers are drained by the Emperor to fuel the beacon, the life forces of the chosen slowly fade and they die, their lives a necessary sacrifice for the continued good of the Imperium and the existence of mankind in a hostile galaxy. This psychic power is then directed by the mind of the Emperor across the width of approximately 70,000 light years range of the beacon. Because Terra is situated in the galactic west, the Astronomicon does not cover the extreme eastern fringe of the galaxy. Warp travel beyond the Astronomicon's reach is severely limited. Thus, it is the Astronomicon's reach that effectively determines the true borders of the Imperium. Destroying the Astronomicon would most likely halt or badly cripple all Imperium warp travel within the galaxy, effectively bringing the Imperium of Man to its knees, both economically and militarily. The mutant navigators, as well as other psychers of any intelligent species, can sense the Astronomicon. It is described as a sensation of silvery light and a chorus of many heavenly voices, beginning first with a solitary voice and progressively growing into an angelic choir. It is suggested that pious space marines who can hear the Astronomicon possess the ability to fall into a meditative trance when they focus on it, perhaps as a result of their genetic descent from the Emperor through the gene seed of their primarchs. Captain Gabriel Angelos of the Blood Ravens chapter of Astartes was known to occasionally enter a sort of battle trance when he heard the Astronomicon while in battle, improving his prowess in combat for the duration of the trance. Astronomicon operation. The chamber of the Astronomicon is located deep beneath the Himalayan mountains of Terra. The original purpose of the device, which would become known as the Astronomicon, has been lost to time. What is known is that it was built by the Emperor of Mankind himself as a focus for his fathomless psychic power. Because of its vital role in the maintenance of the Imperium, the Astronomicon has great religious significance for believers in the creed of the imperial cult and the Emperor's divinity, and it is also sometimes metaphorically referred to as the light of the Emperor, the ray of hope, or the golden path. Limitations of the Astronomicon. Warp storm activity can affect the overall range of the Astronomicon, but it generally had a range of approximately 70,000 light years before the birth of the Great Rift. As the galaxy is about 100,000 light years in diameter, and Terra is approximately 25,000 light years towards the galactic southwest, the Astronomicon barely penetrates the eastern fringe of the galaxy, even less so in the wake of the arrival of the warp-smothering Tyranid hive fleets. Tyranid attraction. The Astronomicon's potent psychic beam is what is drawing the Tyranids like moths to a candle flame to threaten the Milky Way galaxy after they were alerted to its location by the Pharos activation during the Battle of Sotha in the Horus Heresy. It is now also drawing the hive fleets inexorably and irresistibly towards Terra itself.